Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. This is Twist Gaming, where you get to play board games with us. We are coming to you live here from Gen Con 2019, bringing you all the board game coverage all week long. As usual, I'm your host Matt, and I'm joined here with Emily from Parallel Games.
Hello,
How you doing
are
today?
you? I'm good. I'm excited. This is our first Gen Con as exhibitors, so
Oh,
it's
that's awesome.
fantastic.
So, how is it going for you so far?
It's going pretty well. It's a lot crazier than I expected, but it's going really well. We've been really happy with our reception, and the people who've come by the booth have been really great. And we've had a lot of excited people who've done demos and then ended up purchasing the game. So it's fantastic.
That's always great when you're doing the demos and people in turn are just like, yes, I want this, give this
Yes.
to me. Yeah.
Well, and we've had a lot of people like, I've heard of it, and then we give them the 5-minute spiel, and they're like, are you doing demos? And so we're like, yes. And it's just always a good feeling when they sit down and play a game that not only do we like that we created, but we like playing. So
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into things. What have you brought to the table to show off to us today?
we have our flagship first game, City of the Big Shoulders. It's a heavy economic euro that is set in Chicago at the turn of the century. It is played over 5 decades with 5 phases to each decade. Players are starting companies that are actually historically based. You know, we actually have like the Cracker Jack Company and uh, Elgin Watch Company, which are still collector's items, and I can't recall if they still make watches, but they're very highly prized. Spalding, you know, they make Spalding basketballs. So they're all historically based.
Oh, Florsheim shoes. That's really
Yeah,
I
and
didn't.
Florsheim's still around too.
Yeah, I didn't know that these were historical companies that you were
Yes.
using in here.
Yeah, and it's great too because if you're into history, we have a lot of flavor text on the back, just kind of going over like Brunswick still makes pool tables.
Oh yeah.
So we have some cool information on how they got started, you know, why they were featured in our game.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, so you're going to choose to select a company and start it. With that, you go ahead and par your company to determine its starting share value. Then the players will all go around the table and decide if they want to purchase additional shares in their company or stock in other players' companies. After we move on from the stock phase, we go into the building phase. And this is actually my favorite type of mechanic in the game. It is like a variable action space worker placement.
Okay.
So we have players are dealt 3 buildings, and they will look at them secretly.
So
And-
I'm gonna show these off here.
Oh,
so
of course, yeah, please
some of the
do.
different buildings that we've got.
So the buildings are all kind of a little bit different, but they add cheaper managers, cheaper workers, appeal bonuses, things that advance your company and make them better.
Okay.
So players will go ahead and select one secretly to play in their chosen action space. Then they will take one to toss out of the game completely,
Okay.
one to save for future rounds. So in the future rounds, you're dealt 2 more, so you always have 3 to select from. From there, we flip them over, and this helps determine actually the amount of workers that are added to the job market. So this will help because as a company, you have to hire workers to run your factories. So the more workers that are in the job market, the cheaper labor is. So that's kind of the building phase, and I really love it because as someone who really enjoys worker placement and like heavier euros, it is great because every game is a little different, and depending on the companies that were started, players have options and choices that really affect how the game fills out.
So the different companies have different actions that they can take.
It's not that they have different actions, but they have a little bit of different like resources required. And so, as an example, Brunswick, Balk, and Colander, they're, as I mentioned, pool tables. They have 2 factories, and they also have the ability to add a capital asset upgrade. Capital assets here do things like allow you to acquire resources cheaper or increase the price of your goods sold when you sell in bulk, because you are like Sears, if you remember, and they came out with the mail order catalogs. So one of our tiles is mail order catalog. So when you sell your goods, you get an extra bonus because you're reaching more customers.
Of course.
So each company has a factory that requires a certain number of workers and a certain number of resources. And then from that, they will go into the operating phase a little later in the game and trade those resources into goods. sell them to the selected demand track we have here, depending on the type of company they are, and then sell each good for profit, which they'll then either decide to withhold into their company or pay out to their shareholders, creating profit for themselves and other players.
So I'm sorry, you said that this was the
Demand
track here. So I noticed when we were setting up here, these have different number of like pips on the back of the cards
Yes.
here. What does that entail?
So the demand track is really cool because it's kind of tiered. It's really interesting to me how when you play a full game, you get to kind of the end of the game and you're right up before the Great Depression, and we actually have these tiles. They're tiered, so there's 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you shuffle them and you stack them 1 on top down to 4, and then reveal 1s first and then 2s. And it's a little bit random, but not really because we tier it. And as the game progresses, when these fill up with goods, they're removed at the cleanup phase. Everything slides down, and then we refill. But when you get right before the Great Depression, well, there's a lot of supply, but there's not a lot of demand.
Right.
So you can still sell your goods, but things are only worth half their value. So the demand cards kind of build. You start out small with like 1 or 2 spots here, and then they grow to like somewhere there's 7 or 5 or 8. So it's kind of interesting because as the game progresses, players also have the ability to start a second or even third company if they really wanted to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so once you have enough money, you can kind of do whatever you want and start new companies. So you might have 3 shoe companies vying for the same amount of space to sell, or 2 meat packing companies. So it kind of creates a little bit of conflict at the end of the game.
As you know, different companies are competing for the same share, removing the monopolies within the game, stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah.
So you were mentioning a lot of the companies are historically accurate, and we didn't go over these cards over here, but I'm noticing that they've got people on them.
Yes. So the base game comes with paper money, but in our expansion, the Burden of Destiny expansion, we have this great card money. I know a lot of players who play heavier 18xx games prefer poker chips. We thought this was a great happy medium, and I love this. This is our ode to some famous historical Chicago residents. We have Daniel Hale Williams. He was the first open heart surgeon and he was out of Chicago, and he was also half African American. Jane Addams is actually the mother of social work. She did a lot of great things for social work in Chicago. Enrico Fermi, who a lot of people know, is kind of the father of nuclear physics or nuclear power. Ida B. Wells is great because she kind of saw the injustices that were happening to African Americans and wrote about them, and then became the first African American journalist to, work for a big hit time press paper. So she was out of Chicago, and actually she's still like making headway, which I love because I think it was last year they named a street after her, and she's the first African American to be have a street named after her downtown. African American woman, I should say.
That's cool.
We have William LeBaron Jenney. He is the father of the modern skyscraper.
Really?
So and it's perfect that he's still he's from Chicago because obviously we have the Sears Tower and the Hancock Building. And then, of course, our love letter to Carl Sandburg, who the game is actually named. It's his poem, Chicago. He talks about the city of the big shoulders. So he's.
I'm glad that you brought that up because that was going to be one of my questions of where did the name of the game come from?
So he's actually Carl Sandburg wrote this beautiful poem. I highly recommend everyone check it out. It's called Chicago, and it's his ode to his sort of hometown. He's from Illinois, but he talks about how gritty and hardworking and wonderful the people of Chicago are. And I like to think of it as Chicago's in the middle of the country and has these huge, broad coastal shoulders. So I don't know if that's what he was intending, but that's what I like to visualize. We are very happy to feature him in the game, and Raymond, the game designer, that's one of his favorite poems.
Very cool. So then I'm noticing there's still a lot more components on the table. I gotta let me move this over to the other side. So we've got explain to me what's going on over here.
Okay, so each company, these are actually the stock certificates for each company. So we have, as an example, one of our expansion companies. is American Flyer. They are in the Burden of Destiny expansion, which has added 5 new companies with some fun, chaotic and interesting mechanics that kind of come out. But
Okay.
American Flyer actually made toy trains, and we actually have our start player token. If you want to show that off, it is.
It's a train.
Yes, and it's modeled after an American Flyer toy train.
Oh,
That's
really?
why it's not as mechanically correct.
Gotcha.
'Cause it's after a toy.
Anatomically correct.
Yeah, but these are the stock certificates in the game. So we have each company has a 30% director's share certificate, a 20% preferred share certificate, and 10% share certificates. So what will happen throughout the game is players have the opportunity to purchase stocks. So you'll starting your company and taking 30%. So you have to pay into the company to basically become the director. So we'll put 30% down, and that will become your starting funds in your company to be able to do actions, acquire resources. From then on, other players have the ability to purchase the 10% or the 20% to gain additional shares. And because the game is limited to how many pieces of paper you have, it's really advantageous if you go ahead and get the 20% shares, because you can have less pieces of paper but own more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so then these little wooden tokens we have, they also mark where your stock value is and how far you go up on the appeal track on the board. So the appeal track, it kind of measures how popular you are. And as you progress, not only do you get these bonuses here indicated on the board, but you also help determine starting order for acquiring resources. So it's better to go up in appeal so that when you get into this operating phase, you can acquire resources first and maybe beat out your competitor.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So as this game's progressing, you said it's going over a couple of, you said decades, or?
Yes. So instead of rounds in the game, we have decades. And so we start in 1875 and progress up to 1925, and just up before the Great Depression. And then each decade has these 5 phases. I kind of went over the stock phase and the building phase. The action phase is just like the worker placement aspect, where you'll place your workers onto these spaces to acquire like managers and salespeople that will help you advance your company and get special effects, maybe bonuses, earn various and sundry things to improve your company. And then when you get into the operating phase, over here, you can acquire resources from Haymarket Square and the supply chain, which that's what was needed along with workers to go ahead and produce goods.
Okay. And then the game's ending after how many rounds?
5.
5 rounds?
5,
Okay.
yeah. And so it's kind of cool because when you get to about round 3, you'll acquire another partner meeple. So you start out with 2. And then as you progress, you'll automatically get a third. And then when you reach a certain level on the appeal track, you'll get a 4th. And then once you run all factories in your company, you'll receive your last. So you can have up to 5 partners, which is why when you get into the 3rd and 4th round in the game, a lot of people decide to start a second company because they can acquire more wealth that way.
You've got that many managers and partners that you can deal with opening
exactly.
a second company then. That's pretty cool, though, because it gives you that feel of you're expanding your company
Exactly.
and you're growing. And
Yeah, and it's kind of cool, too, because depending on what company you have and what other players have decided to start, maybe nobody's doing a food and dairy company, which is this track here. So you're like, okay, well, I can go ahead and start that and earn more money for myself.
the market needs it.
Yeah. People demand their Cracker Jacks.
So we spoke a little bit about the Burden of Destiny expansion. What else is that adding to the game aside from the additional companies? And then you said these premium cards here as well.
So in addition to the upgraded card money, we have the 5 new companies and these wooden tokens, which replace both the base game and the expansion cardboard pieces to indicate on the stock track and the appeal track. But the companies, I think, are fantastic because if I can reach over here.
You want to grab something?
Yeah,
for
if you can hand me those, that would be fantastic.
Oh, I see Quaker Oats.
Yes. So our 5 new companies are fantastic because they are Florsheim Shoes, which is still around as we mentioned, and Florsheim, they're actually probably the most normal company in the expansion, but they do have some interesting manager bonuses. Then we've got Oscar Mayer. Who doesn't love Oscar Mayer hot dogs? But Oscar Mayer is really interesting because you have to sell goods in bundles, essentially. You have to bundle off your product to get more profit. So it kind of adds this chaotic element that you have to kind of plan for that some of our base game companies don't have. Quaker Oats.
I've heard of them before.
Yeah, I love Quaker Oats, but they were started as a collection of grain mills, and so their product was insanely cheap, but they needed a ton of people to harvest the wheat and mill the grain, so they don't require any resources. But every time you start the operating phase, you have to pay those workers that you employ. So they add that element of a little bit of extra hard playability once you've kind of played through the base companies enough, and you're looking for like the next level. American Flyer is really cool because we talked about them for their toy trains, but they have spots for 2 capital assets. I mentioned earlier that capital assets were these interesting upgrades that you can place. You can place on your company, and they'll do things like help you acquire resources that you can utilize at times that are not during the operating phase. So like if you think that another player is going to acquire these 2 steel resources, you might say, okay, well on my turn in the action phase, I'm going to go ahead and turn this, pay $10 and acquire those steel resources early. So like this is really unique because this is the only company that has 2 capital asset spaces, and it gets a ton of extra money when it uses the mail catalog capital assets. It is a company that really did well during the Great Depression and in the 30s when families, they couldn't afford a lot. So like during Christmas, they would get these toy train sets that the whole family could utilize. So it was this company that kind of took off because it was not expensive, and in poverty, you do what you can to utilize your livelihood and entertainment value. So that's why American Flyer is kind of utilizing that mail catalog aspect. And then we have Schwinn bicycles.
Oh, yeah.
Who doesn't love Schwinn bicycles? But Schwinn needs all the steel. Yeah. They need literally nothing but steel. And so they have a really interesting thing up here where they don't require or they don't have the ability to have managers. But if they get steel, they can get 2 goods and go up 3 appeal.
Okay.
So it's kind of interesting how this kind of little bit of mechanic, I like to say chaos, and advanced playing can really throw the game in for a loop, because you might have 2 base game companies that are doing really well, and somebody might have this harder expansion company that it takes a little while to get off the ground, but then really does well.
It ramps up.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you recommend everyone try the base game companies first. These are a higher challenge, higher difficulty.
Yeah. So the base game companies are all really well balanced. They're not all completely too hard. They're fun. So I recommend, though, if you're not exposed to this type of game, you're not like an 18xx player or a heavy Euro player, you kind of get the basics down, learn with the base companies, and kind of feel out the rest of the game before you tackle kind of the nuances of the expansion companies.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we had to talk about for City of the Big Shoulders?
We just launched our new website, and so our Kickstarter backers should be getting their games any day now.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're really happy with our manufacturer Panda and our shipping and handling companies, and we are very excited to say that the games are almost here. So you should be getting your copy in the next week or 2, and we will have them available for purchase on our website as soon as we have the product in our hands.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So for all of our viewers that are watching that want to see a little bit more of City of the Big Shoulders, we're going to be doing a full playthrough. I believe that's this evening.
Yeah,
correct?
I think it's 7 p.m.
Awesome. 8 p.m.
Oh, 8
8
p.m.
p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll be back at 8 p.m. Eastern Time for a full playthrough of City of the Big Shoulders, where we do our spotlight. We'll do the full playthrough, the first impression session, and you guys can watch and join in on the fun. But for now, we're going to be signing off and taking a brief intermission. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course.
We
Thank
really
you so
do
much.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank all of you for watching at home. We'll be back in just a few moments with more coverage here from Gen Con 2019. Signing off for now, though, I'm Matt. Have a good one, everyone.